Okay. Hey, yeah, it's recording. So it's the Sustainiacs. I have a cat trying to get into the studio right now, just as I hit record.
It's
Deborah
life.
Dull is back with us. I promised, she promised, and she came back because we got so much more to explore, right? And we didn't even really jump into your circular supply chain network, which is really cool. I dig it. I'm going to become one of these volunteer core members and get into this and just bombard you with ideas until you change your URL and change your number and stuff.
Hardly. Test me. I'm up for it.
Hey, now I would tell you this: about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, in a startup, my mission was to get Elon Musk uh, interested in our product. And I called every Friday. I called Tesla and I'd ask for Uncle Elon until they actually knew who I was. And then they blocked my number. So I started calling SpaceX.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Listen, in our space, Michael, though, seriously, persistence is, I might say, the number one most important quality because the world is not ready to change, but they're going to have to change here pretty soon. But I think persistence is really important in figuring out how to continue saying the message. And I was once told as soon as we're bored of our own message, that's once other people might start actually hearing it. So it's a patience, resilience, tenacity game.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah, tenacity, right? I love it. I remember the first time that word was used on me in a football practice, and we laughed for probably every time we got together on a Friday and illegally drank beer. We laughed about the coach telling us about tenacity. But
Perfect. Wholesome message for everyone at home.
yeah, well, don't do that, kids. Um, those are different times. Those were different times. You actually could. I remember it was legal to drink beer driving in a car. So those totally different times. Totally
Yes.
different. But hey, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about other cool stuff like the circular supply chain network and circular supply chains. And so, Deborah, and I can't wait to get your book and read it. So that's going to be really cool because then we'll have you back on for part 3, right? And we'll go through points in that. But we didn't get a chance to really tell people about what the network does. We did a little bit and why they should and getting involved and what that means. So I want to kind of go through that stuff. But you got a lot of great information that's already on there that will tell people exactly. We're not a bunch of Chicken Littles running around going, the sky is falling. In some respects, the sky is actually falling, right? Um, and we got to do something else. And it's the other thing is this is even if the sky isn't falling, it makes sense, right? Business wise.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of ways that we can mitigate the risks we're already feeling in our supply chains. Material security is a challenge for a lot of supply chains, even as the world tells us we've returned to normal. I don't know of a single supply chain that isn't either trying to figure out what to do with excess inventory or still struggling to get good pricing on the inputs they need for their processes. So I find that these circular approaches, circular operations can help to mitigate not all sometimes, but often a good chunk of the challenges that supply chains are facing. So that's one. Two, a lot of the research that we actually feature on the homepage, which is circularsupplychain.network, is research done 10 years ago to show how high commodity pricing has gotten. I have not seen an updated version of this. If anyone is out there who has access to this data, I would love to work together to update this because
I'll
the
introduce you
spike
to
is already there.
somebody. I'm going to
Fantastic.
I will. Yeah, no. I know the founder and CEO of Stina Corporation. If you look up
Perfect.
Stina.com, they do all kinds of data. In fact, they do like the data for the U.S. government on recycling data and stuff like that. I'll introduce you to her. She's great. I had her.
Perfect.
I wanted to have her on the show, but she's so deathly afraid of being on the show. She just got a phobia.
Well, she's on it now, isn't she? So here's the ask of can we update these that were originally done by McKinsey for the World Economic Forum and featured on our website. And essentially what it says is, look, all of the hard work that our professional ancestors completed through the 1900s, learning lean management, introducing different types of technologies to the second and third industrial revolutions. We brought the cost of commodities down impressively to help all of our economies around the world do better. However, since about the year 2000, we've undone and then some all of those technology advances because of the strain we're placing on the planet, which means we need to look for our items coming from someplace else.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense too, right? So when you talk about that, looking at for it coming, that's taking it from linear to circular, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about. We're not.
Right.
I mean, it's not. So we all got to pile on Artemis and go to Mars and start pillaging that planet, right? That's
No, we've
not.
got plenty to do here. Look, we use 100 billion tons of materials every year. The vast majority of that is actually taken from the planet. But we have the capability to use what we've already detached and processed, which is the whole point of this. This is not actually a recycling play. This is a leave an item as itself play. This is a repair, refurb, remanufacture play. And that's the economics piece of the circular economy, is the least amount we can do to an item before returning it to a value stream means our margins will grow. That's the play. And that's why supply chain professionals need to be engaged in this, because we own repair networks, we own optimizing our processes, and
Yeah.
we haven't really been engaged in this conversation these last several years.
So when you're talking about this, there's a bunch of different levels to this, right? So I mean, you have mechanically produced um, products that can then be disassembled, right? So I mean, the pieces parts can be disassembled, refurbished, and brought in. Like we talked about briefly, Renault Motor Group, right? That's what they do, right?
Yep.
They're bringing this stuff. So for years, I remember, in the '80s at Roadway Express, we had Core Restore, right? Was one of our things. So you sent the cores of specific items, and they would restore them. You got a new thing. You got a new refurbished thing. We did it on our forklifts, and we did it with our engines, etc. Right, which is a recycling. That's a circular economy, right? So what? I don't understand why that didn't take place. Is it purely just a money play that, I mean, but it seems like it's cheaper to do it. Has it always been cheaper to do this, or are we just realizing now because of the situation that we're in that the economics are starting to work? You know what I'm saying? Because some things like recycled plastic use, if everybody buys polywood furniture, then it becomes cheaper than other furniture, right? Wind energy, solar energy is now cheaper than conventional energy, but it's taken years and decades to get it there, right? Is that kind of the case?
You know, we have spent, I would argue, 120 years really perfecting this linear economy
You look
model.
great for your age, by the way.
Thank you so much. Actually, notably,
120.
and again, this is the story on our homepage. It was 1924 that an illegal business meeting took place among light bulb manufacturers, and
I saw that. So yeah,
yeah,
good, beautiful. Let's talk
yeah,
about that.
really, really interesting. And this, I get teased sometimes for how much I focus on the story, but I think it's important for us to understand that it wasn't always like this. That there is a known turning point on how we design trash into our customers' lives. Where before there was a focus on you buy a thing, it lasts forever. That was the
Yeah.
idea. Now, 1924, light bulbs of all things, because it was right as the second industrial revolution was starting to pick up energy. Haha, get it? Electrification.
Nice.
That's your nerd joke for the day. But not enough people were buying enough light bulbs. And those who were buying the light bulbs were lasting really long times. And so there wasn't enough inventory turnover for these light bulb manufacturers to make money. And so they all agreed to actually reduce the quality of that light bulb lifetime by almost half. And then they agreed to fine each other if they found that their products were too high of quality. And this is important because it's
Wait a
the
minute. They
first
were going to
time.
penalize each other if they were
Yes,
too much.
yes, they formed a cartel. It was illegal. This is, essentially price fixing, but quality fixing and so forth.
Wow.
And the important part here is that it's the first time we have this written down, this term planned obsolescence. So it's the basis of our linear extractive economy that we all accept as normal today. But it really was almost 100 years ago that this concept started taking hold. And of course, it ended up being good business because then you're starting to balance how little quality can I give to my customer that they still think it's valuable enough to give me money for. And I would argue we continue to walk that line for the last 100 years. And we start to see specialization in markets, and different countries are focusing on different skill sets and technical IP, all around capturing this balance between the low quality levels and how much can be charged for that quality level. And I think we have to shift now, and this is the entire theoretical basis of the circular economy, that says we simply don't have enough material inside the planet to continue to fuel this extractive based economy. So we need to start looking for, of course, changing the model. Ideally, we don't just use a bunch of stuff over and over again. We shift the way that we interact with items, but then we don't get our inputs from the planet is really the goal.
Yeah, or minimize them as much as possible. I mean, we got to take. So I'm thinking about baby steps to get there, right? The different pieces, parts of different things. You can't wait till you can make the entire leap. Sometimes you got to make a leap, but you also got to do the baby steps or you don't get there. Both are true, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It's interesting. So because this has developed, I mean, there was this illegal cartel, the light bulb cartel or whatever, and that makes a lot of sense. I had no idea that was there. I'm going to look that up and read the hell out of it because that's something I would geek out over. But then that was illegal, but then it became this like business practice that is not illegal as long as you're not, colluding. Then but it's become an essential core of business practice and marketing and right. So, wow, how do you now take not only private, because we become this international, obviously world, we're a world and we're internationally linked more than we ever have been. So now you have like entire societies that have this type of mentality. It's not just businesses. How do you convince them it's wrong and change it? Because that is a huge, while you talk about it, a disruption of the haves and have-nots. The potential for devastation and changing that is huge, but then the potential for not changing that is even worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an entire movement around what's called a just transition to a circular economy, as in justice-based equity.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we don't just move the haves into a different type of model? So, for example, a popular business model idea is product as a service. And the famous story from that 1924 light bulb meeting is that Philips was in the room. Now Philips offers lighting as a service. But I find that not everyone can afford to have everything in their house as a service. I think it might bankrupt society if everything is a monthly expense. So we need to start imagining how we might bring along the whole 8 billion people in the world instead of the top few percent. So 2 resources for people to check out, which I think are interesting. One, something called donut economics. And the idea, in reality, I understand why they make it a circle, because then you can call it a donut. But since we're supply chain people here, really think about an upper and lower control limit. To the bottom, it says the absolute bare minimum we need to function as society and get everyone's minimum needs met. And the maximum upper control limit is how much we're able to pull from the planet. And we need to be functioning in between there. And there is an in between there, but we don't really talk about the world in upper and lower control limits. But it's really called donut economics. Really should take this and turn it into a circle.
Yeah, but we really should be, right?
Certainly.
So, yeah, I mean, so that's one, right? Is there a second?
The second resource I really recommend folks check out is somewhat related. Many of us consider ourselves to be middle class. This has been proven many surveys across the world. You go ask school children in Sweden is the basis of this project, and they all consider themselves middle class as the world is concerned. Now, imagine the world was actually one long street, and your neighbors made only slightly more and slightly less than you. But it doesn't matter which country you're in. It could be any country around the world where you make about the same amount of money. And there's a very interesting organization that launched something called Dollar Street. And so that you can see in pictures what it looks like for a family at any income level around their house. What does the kids' room look like? Toys, toilets, toothbrushes, kitchens, and so forth. And what they
Yeah.
found was regardless of where you are in the world, at an income level, life looks the same. So this I think is really interesting for all of us to go and look that we're actually doing pretty well in the grand scheme of things. And that's not to say, look, your wallet isn't hurting right now. It's rather to say, look, there's a whole world out there that we need to consider as we start thinking about systems change and as we start to redesign this system we've used for the last 100 years so that we do bring everybody up with us and we can all we really can all do better, not to sound socialist, but there is this bottom piece of the world that's actually a larger percentage than I think most people realize.
Really? So, I mean, you're talking about like the bottom of the bottom of the pyramid and the top of the pyramid and getting somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah,
Because we're nowhere
absolutely.
near getting to that middle, but there is that middle. Isn't that sound business practice as well, right? Because I mean, Dow. So, for instance, Dow Chemicals has been thinking about this for decades, right? The pyramid. They started adopting this type of thing in, like, I think the 80s or the early 90s, thinking about the bottom of the pyramid. Is that what you're saying? I mean, as a society, as a world, we need to be thinking about that, right? What about the bottom of the pyramid? And that helps the top of the pyramid when you help the bottom of the pyramid, right?
Right. It's a different innovation tool, right? As we start thinking under constraints, sometimes we find the most lovely, innovative approaches. Like closed captioning was not created for the masses, but now most of us watch videos on closed captioning when we're on our phone because we don't want to bother everybody. That wasn't designed for people who can hear. So in
Right.
this way, if we put constraints on our innovation processes, sometimes we can come out with something that's really, really interesting. And we remember that more people in the world have access to cell phones than they do to toilets. So the way that we think about access is shifted. So I'm not asking people to go off and completely change the way you entirely operate your entire business. However, as we think about redesigning, there are additional components to think outside your direct sphere of what access might look like.
Yeah. So when you start talking about redesigning, okay, let's think about that. And since we're on more of a macro level, part of this circularity and running out of these resources and using, like you said before, and I love the term, what has already been detached, right? Let's
Yeah.
use what has already been detached. I love that. I used it once and people looked at me like I was smart. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna use that more often. Um, they thought I had become detached, actually. But no, when we talk about specific things, because when you're talking about, like, on your website, and I encourage everybody to go there. I think whether you're in supply chain or not, this is important stuff for you to understand. If you're just a regular, not in supply chain or anything, or you're a doctor or a lawyer, whatever your job is, and it's not in supply chain, you're actually impacted by supply chain. So you should go to circular supply chain. What is it? Circularsupplychain.network, and check it out, because it's really cool. And if you hit on the Go Circular, that's where you find this timeline that'll take you down the path. I'm already at the path here where you start talking about cars. So your car is completely useless 92% of the time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not useless, but it's not being used 19% or 92% of the time, right? Or, like you said, even in here, this is one that kills me, because this is not true in my house, right? A power drill is only used for 15 minutes. That's its entire lifetime.
In
Now,
most cases, yes. Because how
see,
long does it
mine's
really
used
take to
about
use it?
15 minutes every other hour.
Right. You are in the exception here. But I mean, the idea is if everyone just looks around the house and sees something that really isn't used, or many folks own over 5 or 8 pairs of jeans because they're really looking for that perfect pair, and so most of them sit there and aren't used at all. So the premise here is that, and it's an item not used, is not adding value to you, and it's not adding value to the economy at that time. So it could be a power drill, it could be a bicycle, it could be all those extra cables that we all have in that random drawer because we don't really know what they go to, but we're too
Oh no,
scared to
I
throw
got
them out.
boxes. Like a boxes.
Totally, not adding value. And those all have components inside that might be able to be used in other ways. So the idea is, look, an item in idle state isn't helpful. So how do we rethink to drive up utilization? So where today, supply chain often looks at optimizing for inventory turns. Tomorrow, the idea is that we're going to optimize for utility or utilization use.
Hmm. It sounds like a almost is it in some sense a movement towards minimalism a little bit?
I argue it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
I think it goes towards, I will continue to talk about access here. If
Yeah.
we imagine, the world is urbanizing. So I think the stat is by 2050, 80% of the world will live in cities. I think that's the stat.
You sounded so confident in that statement.
Oh,
Couldn't believe
we're directionally headed that way. So if
it.
you can
Okay.
imagine density, and then
Yeah.
everyone has a way to have the use of a blender and a vacuum in these items that we really don't use every day but sit in our closet. That might look like an added benefit of living in an apartment building. And actually, this has now started to be showcased as a benefit in some apartment buildings in New York and in LA and in different European cities, that says, why have that extra closet just store all this stuff that you really don't use that often? You're really not going to use your blender. Some people use their blender every single morning. Good on you. Keep it in your house. But if you just use it on like margarita Saturdays, then maybe you only need to use it for 15 minutes. So can there be a way that we share what we don't need to use every single minute of every single day? I think that becomes more possible with density, so that you're not inconvenienced to be able to use a lot of items. So there's still the quality of life piece, but it's like, wouldn't you like to get all that clutter out of your, like, do you need a rice cooker and a slow cooker and a hot pot and a, what do they call them? Air fryer, love mine, blender, all of that just in one closet if you really aren't going to use it every minute of every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if you're in a single family home, then you kind of have to, or otherwise it's not there, right? But like you said, density solves some of those issues. And that's really the movement towards rideshare too, right? And autonomous vehicles could
Exactly.
really solve a lot of that issue, right?
Exactly. And I live in Seattle. We have a car sharing program, Gig Car. And that's how I use cars if I need to use a car. You pay per minute, it caps out per hour, and I find it wildly convenient. They insure me, and I only pay when I use it, which is usually only 1 or 2 times a month. Do I need a car? But this is not possible if there's not a dense population to support
Right.
financially and drive utilization up.
Yeah, so I ran into those first time I ran into that type of thing was in Boston years ago. It was called I think they were called zip cars.
Mm-hmm.
You just you basically walk up to the car, put your credit card into a slot, and you drive away. And then wherever you're done, you park it, and somebody else can do that, right?
Exactly right. Yep. And that's the basic idea of this sharing model. And cars seems to be easier for us. I find that they're a bit ahead of other industries. The idea of a used car in the 80s is that you're definitely going to get ripped off. But now a certified pre-owned car is a really good deal. You know,
100% guaranteed.
you
I
get
remember the. I remember the. You remember the movie Used Cars?
Of course, it's the joke, right? And why would you ever do that? But we know that when you drive a car off the lot, it loses whatever 30% of its value. So if we think about now, you can go get a certified pre-owned car. In many cases, it's preferred because it's essentially like new for half the cost. And then if we
Amen.
think about the car dealer side, they're making a ton of money off of that because they didn't have to go and buy all those components and put all that labor hour and all that quality inspection. So they're actually making good deal money. You're happy. That's a perfect example of why we want to do reuse more than build new. Similarly, this idea of sharing cars, either share car plus driver in an Uber or Lyft model, or drive yourself in a car, which is starting to pop up more and more and more. Scooter sharing, although they're very annoying and clogging up sidewalks, there is something there, and I think that idea will continue.
Well, I think the idea is there on the scooter. I'm not a big fan because man, it was at the height of it in Atlanta. Walking around was like a pain because
Totally.
they were just everywhere. It's like, oh, come on, man.
I mean, side note, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but can you imagine if our cities weren't designed around cars, how much space there would be for scooters to go do their thing and pedestrians to be left alone?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I've thought about that before because like even down here in Chattanooga, so they started redesigning this area in Chattanooga. It's called West Village, and it looked like everything was just going to be walking streets. And I was like, yeah, that's really cool. But they didn't. But they're brick streets and they look beautiful and stuff like that. But you're 100% right. If we design things differently, because you can see the progression of where we went, and then we didn't get there. We needed some European designers or somebody to come over to help
Yeah,
us once we got somewhere. Because you go to Boston or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and try and figure out what's north and what's south and what's east and what's west. You can't do it, but you
totally.
can in Indianapolis. It's
Totally.
really easy because everything's just a grid, right?
Yep. Yep.
I mean,
Totally.
you go into Pittsburgh and you miss a turn and you're going through over three bridges, through a tunnel, and around a mountain, and you're like, am I in Ohio now? What happened? I don't understand. I just missed one turn. So, yeah, our urban design was not didn't
Not
think
made
too
for humans, made for cars. It's a
It
tough one.
was, yeah, and it didn't think real far into the future, did it? It was like we've got all this land and and that's what I was talking about in a minimalist type of thing, right? It's not a minimalist thing; it's more of a stop thinking in excess. You don't have to have a million things, right? And isn't it so? I mean, as a society, we've been taught that, and I think played on our ability to go, "Ooh, something shiny, I need that too." Right? I mean, and musicians are among the worst because I have a perfectly good guitar, but I got to have seven other ones, right? Because I've convinced
Totally.
myself that they sound different and stuff like that, right?
I'll give yourself some
And
credit. You were tricked into that by our linear extraction based economy. You didn't come up with that idea on your own.
no, I didn't, but I sure am a sucker for it.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because I think, and I am not an economist, but I think we've not only gotten to a point where we think it's okay, we think we've earned it, and somehow by not allowing ourselves to buy whatever it is that we want, we've somehow shorted ourselves in the quality of life, right? And so this
Right.
idea of items around us. But anyway, some people are shifting and talking more about how lovely it is to be out in the wilderness and all that kind of stuff. I'm not an outdoors person, but I sure do feel better mentally when I have fewer items, I will say.
I do too. And here's the thing: you don't have to be an outdoors person to live a nomadic type of minimalist lifestyle. You don't have to, right? You can
Absolutely.
easily travel from city to city instead of from park to park, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
I mean that can absolutely be done as well. That's really interesting, and the concept of sharing makes sense to me. I don't get autonomous cars. I don't understand why that's a thing. To tell you the truth, I think it's a waste of money being thrown into stuff. I don't get it.
I think as
Um,
long as autonomous machines are allowed to operate around humans, it's never going to work out. Humans are fickle. We've spent billions, if not, I don't know, trillions of dollars trying to figure out what consumers do over the years, and we can't figure it
yeah,
out. So I think as long as there's a space for autonomous machines, even if they are carrying humans, but they shouldn't interact with humans. And so we need a different space for them to hang out and drive around. And then I think there can be some really interesting George Jetson type of innovations there to get folks around a city. But I don't. I think we're going to continue to have these accidents if we allow these machines to try to attempt to anticipate what humans do. But we're fickle. We don't even know how our own brains work. So I'm not sure how we can try to teach a machine that.
yeah, no, I totally 100% agree. And I mean, I read all these. Here's a new flying car. Here's a new flying. Here's
Yeah.
another new flying. Come on, man. We can't even get people to stay out of the left-hand lane if they're going slow. And you want them to fly a
How
car?
true.
I mean, come on. That's absolutely crazy. So we talk about all these things, and it makes really good economic sense to apply circularity to your supply chain. There are raw materials out there that are previously detached,
Yes, there
right?
are
And,
many,
and,
many,
and
many.
many of them, and there's so many opportunities. I mean, I used to have, back in the day, I had customers I can say that, I don't know if I should say the name or not, but it doesn't matter. They were melting the precious metals out of circuit boards and stuff like that, right? And this was in the early 90s. I mean, the circuit boards weren't around all that long, and they were already recovering this type of stuff. Why didn't that grow further?
We got really, really, really good at forward supply chains. And what that means is it actually became cost prohibitive to harvest gold or the precious metals out of circuit boards or similar. We're
Yeah,
starting to see that economics shift, and in a large part, thanks to autonomous robots. So, for example, Apple has put in a tremendous amount of money into a few robots who can now take apart their iPhone to harvest the gold and other items of interest inside. And so,
right.
iPhone 13 was the first to be built with fully recovered gold. They're seeing the writing on the walls, I think. They've also recently changed their perspective on the right to repair laws, now coming out in full support, which tells me they've figured out their repair networks. Another interesting company who is one to watch and follow is called Molg, MOLG. They have autonomous cells to disassemble electronics servers, something like similar to this. So they'll often need to redesign how an item is built so that it can be disassembled more easily. But it's
Yes.
disassembled for remanufacturing. So it's disassembled for remanufacturing. And the recovery rate is quite high of what they're finding inside. And because it can run 24 hours, as long as there's a automated inventory feed, and they use machine vision to check for quality, they can recertify batteries all autonomously. It's actually quite cost competitive against human beings doing that. So I think
Yeah.
there's an interesting shift where some of these technology advancements can actually help us in our attempt to recover and reuse. Where today, essentially, it has to be a human. That human needs to be paid a living wage and be treated nicely. But the robot doesn't even know if the lights are off, so it's totally fine. They can keep working through the night, right? This is where these repetitive tasks are really great to be handed to autonomous robots.
Yeah, and that's where the autonomy makes sense to me.
Totally.
Me owning an autonomous car makes no sense to me.
Fair. Or
Like
like
I
the
don't.
smart toasters now that scan your bread and figure out how to smart toast. Those are wonderful.
No, see, no. Listen, I have one that actually has a keto setting.
It's perfect. Does it take out the
I know.
gluten?
I
Yeah,
love
that's
it.
great.
If I change the setting, it says, "Are you sure you usually eat this type?"
Your
No,
toaster knows you very well.
yeah, it does it. No matter what I do, it gives me what I want. It doesn't matter. It knows me better than I do. Um, that's crazy. No, that makes total sense. So it was more of an idea that was ahead of its time because it was a cheaper way to do things. And so it comes back down to, and I'm not that I'm not against it, but it comes down to the dollar, man. You follow the
Of course
dollar,
it
and I've said
does.
this my
Yeah,
entire life. Why is this happening or why is this happening? When people ask it, I say follow the dollar.
always.
Whether it's it doesn't have to be a nefarious thing, it doesn't have to be an evil thing, but if you follow the dollar, that's the motivation, whether it was collusion or whether it was just that's the way we're wired, because this collusion of light bulb manufacturers, Edison and his buddies, whatever, um, now it's being done, but it's not there's not this Dr. Evil with his cohorts out there going, we're going to make sure that cell phones don't last more than 3 years, or whatever it happens to be. Right.
I mean, some can speculate here. Uh,
Well, it's
but
planned into it, but I don't
of
think it's
course it
all the
is.
manufacturers together, right? I
No,
mean,
of
they're planning
course.
into it, but yeah, these conspiracies, a lot of them are true. It's just that the nature of them aren't that there's a 5 or 10 big, evil people sitting in a room conspiring to do this.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the basis of business, right? If somebody pays you for something, then you've got a business model. So we've all gotten here together one way or
Yeah.
another. But I think the following the dollar is a great rule of thumb, especially in supply chain. If you're an analyst or trying to solve a problem and you can't figure out your root cause, go follow the money and you'll figure out your ultimate root cause. And similarly, if we look at why might we change to a different operating model or a different operations approach, it'll be for financial gain often, unless you're trying to take a market, enter, win market share, respond faster, and so forth and so on. But that's where I think a big misunderstanding of the circular economy comes in, that a lot of people couch it under CSR or sustainability, where originally it is meant to be an economic model to help you make more money while decoupling how much you need to take from the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was getting. So the concepts that we're talking about here and the realities that we're talking about here, actually, they're sound business models, and they've been in place forever. We just kind of drifted away from them because that was cheaper, or whatever. I don't know how you go back in time, and I don't know if you went back in time that you changed that, because things would have been more expensive. And would we have some of those things? Like, even in here, you talk about our quality of life, not just what we have and our comforts, but our health really grew out of the linear economy as well, right? I mean, would we have advanced as well as we have in a circular economy? Or are we, in other words, are we following the right path that we went linear and now we're going, oh, now we got to go circular, and this is actually the right path rather than being circular the whole time? You know what I'm saying?
If we had a parallel universe, we could find out, right? What I
Right.
do know is what got us here won't get us there. So as we are looking to continue to grow and continue to get healthier, look, we are much better off than we were 100 years ago. I really recommend a book called Factfulness, from the same family actually that created Dollar Street I mentioned earlier. And it's
Yeah.
actually a fact-driven, positive look at the world. This is not commonly found on your bookshelves anymore.
Yeah.
Positive outlook that says
Wow.
we're
That's
living
hot.
longer, we're doing better. It's actually safer than it was 20, 30 years ago. Truly.
Yeah.
Check out the book. It'll make you feel, hopefully, it gives you a little bit of optimism as you
Yeah.
turn off the news. Don't read the newspaper for a couple of days and read this book, Factfulness, instead.
You feel a little bit better. Yeah, no, and there were a group of really, I don't know why they did it, but they took a group of researchers. I think it was University of Illinois that mutated the genes of a common mouse to mimic that of a naked mole rat, which is like a huge step forward to expanding the longevity and health of humans, because naked mole rats live 10 times longer than regular rats.
Interesting.
So, I mean, the potential there is you got a 700-year lifespan.
Sometimes I wonder, like, do we want to be 150 years old? I
Yeah, exactly.
mean,
But and this gene, it prevents. So the naked mole rat does not suffer from cancer or heart disease or diabetes. Its joints and things don't even swell or have inflammation as they age. Doesn't experience any of that type of stuff.
wow.
So, anyways,
Wow.
I
Very
thought
interesting.
that was kind of interesting that we get there. But here, so it leads me to this other point: is not only are all these concepts sound business models, and they're coming of age really through not only necessity, but I think necessity and, the, like you said, it's cost effective, are kind of intertwining at the right time, right? To promote this. But the fact is we're running out of stuff too, right? This is not going
Definitely.
to be there in 50 years.
Definitely. And, the argument is maybe there's another stash of these inputs that we need, metals and et cetera. And maybe there are, maybe we will discover more inside the planet. At some point, we'll run out. And I am a firm believer in fixing the problems we have instead of terraforming Mars. So at some point, either we kick
Or,
the
or
can down the
or
road.
or meteors, right? I mean, that's part of the project too. Is why we're trying to hit meteors, is to target them to actually send Ben Affleck up there to drill it, right?
Right. But I mean, honestly, everybody, look, we have plenty of materials. A lot of it's just sitting in landfill at this point. So we have the technology, I am told, to go and mine landfill. It's more complicated than mining for a single mineral, call it. But I'm told we have that technology. So it will happen. We will use what we already have, what has already been detached, and we need to be able to process it in a different way. And and I was going to ask you for an update. There are other ways that we can go off and find sources for plastics, for example, going
Yes.
out into the ocean, going out into the wherever it's not adding value, and then processing it in a way that can be used better, cleaner, resulting in fewer microplastics, et cetera. So we can upcycle this fugitive value that's running around and adding no value whatsoever. There's a lot of that material already zooming around the world.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we've only recycled like 9% of all the plastics that's ever been made. Right. It's not that. I mean, it's bad enough that we dropped from 9% annually in the United States down to like 5.5 over the last 5 years. That's awful. But only like 9% ever has been recycled. And they found plastic rocks, actual plastic rocks. So I mean, it is now part of our geology. The lava, a volcanic island off of the coast of South America, has spewed rocks with plastics in them
Yeah,
already.
they're
So
on our lungs, they're on our blood. We're here.
yeah, no,
We've
it's
done
it's
this.
everywhere.
We're here.
Yeah, so there's so much research and everything being done with the plastics and trying to figure it out, and none of it is really perfect because we're still trying to figure it out. But we're making there's baby steps being there. Pyrolysis is not the 100% the answer. It does pollute. There is problems with that, but it's getting there to where it needs to go. And people fighting and protesting against these different efforts, I don't think is helpful, because we need to get better. We can't be perfect. Just go from here to perfect. We need to go through different steps of failures and just steps towards the positive and getting there. But yeah, you asked me before we started recording if how much plastics we crunched. What we've been doing is working with, and I can't say the universities yet or anything like that, but we visited some farms last week, and so we're really getting heavy into looking at ag plastics. So there's a few billion pounds of plastics that comes out of the earth every harvest season. And it goes straight to landfill or goes straight to incineration because it is so contaminated with dirt and pesticides, et cetera. And so we're working with some people and a lot of the ag plastic producers now. I mean, this has exploded over the last week, the interest in what we can do with our mobile recycling units, uh, to grab that right out of the ground. As they're pulling it out of the ground, they do their harvest, they pull the plastics out of the ground, then they retill the soil, and then they cover it with plastic again and start all over. Uh, this one average size farm, it's an average size farm. It's like 1,000 acres or something like that. 300,000 pounds of plastics every harvest. Every harvest,
Not a small amount.
300. No, it's a bunch. It's a bunch. And you've got locations. So, like in some countries, they just till it into the soil. They didn't bother to pull it out. They just
Yeah.
till it right into the soil and put new plastics down. And the problem with that is the possibility of, I think it was University of Rochester, uh, discovering this biofilm that is now being found on microplastics and plastics in soil. Have you read this?
Generally not the specific study though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but it's just that in soil, regular soil, the instability of the soil means that the heavy chemicals and or the heavy metals and the pesticides, et cetera, different chemicals move through the soil rather quickly and go right into our water, so we drink it. Right? The plastics, it sticks to the plastics because it's a stable surface, so it stays there. The problem is that microorganisms and bacteria do as well because it's a stable surface. Right now, the issue there is that organisms and bacteria can mutate very quickly in stressful environments to deal with those stresses. Hence, COVID. Right? I mean, that's how it works. It's a defense mechanism. Right? COVID and other diseases or influenzas, et cetera, coronaviruses, their goal isn't to kill the host. Their goal is to survive in the host. And so that's why they're mutating all the time, right? And so that's what's happening on these plastics. So now you have these bacteria and microbes on there that could that are mutating to deal with these heavy chemicals and pesticides. The potential for them to mutate into a superbug that is now in our food supply is quite high. That's a problem. Imagine a pandemic bug that is spread through food.
Yeah.
That's not good.
No, we do have food based issues. Lettuces often something happens along the way, and we already see how bad that is. But yeah, the scale of that is large.
Yeah, it's large and it's scary. But like you said, we're making there's so many efforts and great efforts, and I'd like to leave this one on a positive note, right? I mean, there's so many positive. There really are. You talk about the negatives because that's the problem, and then you have to have the solution. And we have those solutions, and those solutions are growing. I'm working on solutions. You're working on solutions. We're not the only two. There are people, I dare say, way smarter than us, and with way more capable that we're talking about that are making these things happen as well, right? And my hope is just through my efforts with OPT USA and this is to inspire other people to go, hey, we can do this, and make things happen, because I'm not going to save the world. I know that, but we will. We're making strides, right? I mean, things are
Absolutely.
there. People are understanding this. They're starting to mine this stuff, and they're starting to do. It's great. One last thing that I want to talk about is circularity. And there's a couple people that are doing this. We're detaching things. Now we're talking about when you talk about that, I think about our precious minerals, right? And on your thing, you have the periodic table up there, and you're talking about the different elements, and we're running out of some of those elements. And you actually have them colored in different scales, so you can see just how many years of supply we estimate that we have, right? What about plant-based solutions, right? So there's a company called Hemspan that's building houses out of hemp. I mean, these are truly. I don't know if you know these guys out there, but Matt Belcher, the CEO out there, is a tremendous guy, and they're building these houses, and their communities will actually be energy grid positive, right?
Yeah, I
So
love
there's
this
zero
space.
emissions, zero carbon construction houses, and a community of them actually produces energy back onto the grid. That is tremendous stuff, right?
Yes, and gets us towards the step beyond sustainability. And don't roll your eyes, it's going to have to happen. Look, we pushed the planet a little too far, and we're going to have to make the world a better place than how we found it. And plant-based solutions can help a lot. But it depends on how we grow those plants. I'm seeing a,
Exactly.
a big shift. So mushroom-based packaging, leathers, vegan, bacon, grown inside of a factory, not in the ground pulling nutrients out, right? So we need to be really careful as we shift to plant-based plastics, plant-based clothing, plant-based housing, that we're not just taking away from the food sources that we need. But I think
Yes.
this is a great time again for those advanced technology applications where we can start to grow food in different ways, or grow plants in different ways that we can then use as critical building blocks.
Yeah. Well,
Super cool space.
one of the arguments that Matt was talking about was that the farmers and this is a great crop. Hemp is a great crop because it grows quickly. You don't harvest the entire plant, and what is left is really, really good for regenerative farming. So it's a really good rotational crop, and you can use it for so many different applications. So it's one of those really good ones.
Go check out hemp,
Yeah.
everybody. That's your Google task.
I love it. I love it. And a shout out to Luke Haverhalls out there in natural fiber welding. Those guys, that is a tremendous thing too, right? You're already finding their stuff in certain automobiles. The leather isn't leather. It's
Cool.
plant-based materials.
Really, really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And Unless Collective out your neck of the woods, Unless Collective out there is plant-based shoes and other
Very, very
clothing,
cool. Yep.
which is really cool stuff. Love that stuff. Anyways, hey, we're going to come back again because you're going to send me your book. I'm going to read it or have someone read it to me, and then and then we'll talk about it again. We'll talk about some more stuff. What's in the book? I love this. We're going to have to do like a regular show and talk about different things here because this is
Perfect.
tremendous
Thanks for having me
and
on. Appreciate it.
it's awesome. Peace and love. Thank you so much, everybody. Check her out. Check out the circularsupplychain.network. Go there, read the stuff, and sign up. Get the information, and maybe it'll inspire you to get involved, and you'll be the savior. Who knows? It's possible. I don't know. Anyways, peace and love, everybody. Hey,